of a migraine that's like euphoric, but there's also a sense in which like I don't know what it is, like excitation of neurons or whatever that activity is moves to a certain point, and like then you start seeing colors and shapes and have feelings.
Yeah,
it's like migraine. Sounds great.
No, you don't want one.
No, it's not worth it. Don't do it.
Not worth it.
No, it's terrible. But for me, like the fragility of the day after, like the migraine hits, and then it's like give up on life, go in a dark room and just sleep. It doesn't matter what time it is, just give up. And then the next day there's this like fragile beauty to everything. Like I appreciate everything so much. There's no pain, and the colors are bright, and the birds are singing, and the coffee's warm. It's like, yeah. Well, I'm glad your migraine is getting better, Jennifer.
Thank you.
David, do you have the blurb? Yes. It's the 21st. This is the 21st live stream. It's not the 21st of the month. It's the 22nd of the month, but
21st.
Live stream number 21, Solid Ground.
We got it there. We got to that all important landmark, 21.
Yeah, significant somehow.
Okay, so here's the blurb. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice, CSJ, aka woke, and or COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies, and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 per month. And to find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note, Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And so, yes, we're here with David, Jennifer, Deborah, and myself. And it's lovely to see you all today. And today I sent you guys, I don't know if y'all had already seen it, but I sent over a recent James Lindsay podcast, New Discourses podcast, where I thought he did such a good job of breaking down like the taxonomy of a social movement, or whatever you want to call this, a cultural revolution. And I thought it was very well stated, and it answered some questions that we get a lot when we talk in our groups. I don't know about you guys actually, but in the groups where, for me, we spend a lot of time talking about how we're impacted by different things and specific scenarios that come up and how we process those, and giving each other comfort and advice. But we also, the question comes up often, like, what can we do and what should we be doing in response? And people who are on the fence about speaking up or how to do so, and worried about jeopardizing their jobs, all kinds of questions. And what he did, James Lindsay, in this recent podcast, was he really broke down like the steps of this movement and what role each person is playing. And did you guys have a chance to check that out?
Yes, it was really good. I listened to it last night. I loved it. It's just a quick 30 minutes, but it's packed with a lot of really useful information, I think.
Yeah. And it was called like How to Fight a Tyrannical Movement or something. How to Fight a Tyrannical Movement. Yes. And so he broke down the players, like the I've just said like about 16 times. Like back out of my vocabulary. He broke down the archetypes of people and how we are going to correspond to this given movement into 5 categories, which he called ringleaders. So these are the orchestrators of things, the people pushing the ideology. The strivers, which he called the moral zealots, and the basically the red guard of this, or maybe the rainbow guard this time. The normies, people who are either not very aware of it or not taking things very seriously and kind of have their heads in the sand. The doubters, who are the people who don't agree with the movement but lack the courage to do anything about it. And then the rebels, who are the people who are willing to stand up and talk about it. Did you guys have any thoughts about those categories, or what did you think about that?
One thing on the strivers, because at least my understanding of it was they aren't necessarily so ideological. It's more like they'll use the movement to get other aims. Like he gave the example of talking to someone who had their kid at probably a private school where there was a lot of woke things going on. And it was basically like the guy would do anything just so his kid can get into a good college. So if it's like, I need to go along with this thing, I will. But it could be, he would probably turn on a dime if there was another way for him to, meet his social needs or something. So,
like pragmatists.
I think he sort of likened them to the sort of ESG types, the people the cabal of like elitist people who are self-interested but don't necessarily have an ideological position. They're just interested in exploiting things for their own means, exploiting power for their own means.
Yeah, I see them as sort of soldiers for hire that will fight for whichever side will pay them more. And if they think that they can gain prestige by following along with critical social justice, they'll do it. If that vanished within a month, they would look for the next thing that is holding cultural and economic power, and they would go towards that to advance themselves. It's all about their own economic and social advancement.
So sort of like a social mercenary, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It seems like I don't know if he said that, but it seems like in this case, I mean, they're the ones that are operationalizing stuff the most, right? Like they're the ones that are like, I'm the CEO of a business, or I'll make this legislation or something. Whereas I don't know if the ringleaders might stir up some stuff. There's some speaker that people get inspired by, but I don't know if they can get that much done in the society to make stuff change.
So that brings a question up for me, and that's who are the strivers? Is the strivers this broad category of people from like the CEO of a university to the student who's fist pumping and chanting about stuff, or is one of those the ringleader? Is the CEO of the university a ringleader, or is he just another striver?
The way James Lindsay was breaking it down, he was saying that the ringleaders are actually making the agenda.
Okay.
And the strivers are following along with the agenda for their own advancement and self-interest. So, I mean, that always, I think in a lot of conversations, we do kind of go back to, the whole question of who's doing this? Like, why is this being done to us? Like, what the heck? And so I think James Lindsay said less about the ringleaders, but he was saying they're the ones who make the agenda and they point out who the enemy is, who's problematic. I guess you could say some of the ringleaders would be the World Economic Forum, certainly. I think people like that who have a lot of cultural power and the money.
That's really interesting. I think it's easy to kind of get in the weeds about that because there's where's it coming from? And then you get people mad because they're calling you a conspiracy theorist and whatnot. But somebody is funding this. When UNESCO and the WHO implement comprehensive sex ed guidelines that then all of the schools take up in unison, and we're all teaching the same thing, well, there's some centralization happening. And I don't think that it makes you some kind of conspiracy theorist to observe that and ask questions and say, who's funding this? Whose agenda is this? And if we can isolate who that is, then we have a source for discussion and for rhetorical accuracy, really. So that would be the ringleader.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if there aren't two types of ringleaders. Like there could be ones that are actually ideologically quite down with the cause, like sincerely, whatever we might think of it. And then I'm wondering if there might be others who know they can use the cause. They're still not the strivers, because the strivers are kind of doing it for their own like social gain, but like there might be people who are like, I want this such and such happening in the world. And this is gonna be convenient if we get a bunch of people thinking this thing. I don't actually care about it. And it's not even for my own like status. It's just more like I have a vision of the world. And I'm imagining, this is me kind of making things up, like if you had some evil like world economic, some person who's like, we just want to have depopulation, there's too many people on the planet or whatever, so let's push these things that make people not even wanting to have children anymore or whatever. And they might not even really believe in certain woke points of view or whatever, right? But they might go, but this might get people to do stuff. Now it's a very conspiracy thinking kind of thing, but I don't know if there's a difference between really true believers who are generating this stuff and people that are like, this is instrumental, but it's not necessarily just for my own status. It's just like, I have other plans.
No, that's a really interesting breakdown. I think that's, and does the motivation matter?
Probably not in terms of, I don't know. I'm wondering if in terms of countering it, I'm not sure. Not sure.
What do you think, David?
Well, I was just wondering if yeah, would you sort of separate them out? Because you'd say they're kind of like single issue ringleaders. They're ringleaders who aren't embracing all aspects of the ideology, but just have one issue that's particularly speaking to them. They'll go along with things. I thought you were going to say, Deborah, something akin to the reactionaries, which he talked about a bit later, didn't he? But actually, I think that's a different type of person. Well, this is what I found quite interesting as well. Was James Lindsay pointed out that the rebels who are the people that speak out against this stuff can be split off into two groups again, and
right,
it made me think of some conversations we've had recently, guys, about those that maybe seem to be rebels with the same cause in mind, but actually are reactionaries, who are people who are just simply looking again at this as an opportunity to fulfill their own self-interest. And so the rebels have to be doubly mindful that they're not only pushing back against the ideological position of the ringleaders and trying to hopefully get some strivers along the way to sort of realize it's not good for them, but also realize that there are reactionaries within their own sort of communities who are people who are maybe not even quite consciously aware at the time, but probably people who are self-interested at their core. And I guess it just means, all of this makes me think that people really just need to have a really tight handle on who they are and their ability to, or their kind of unconscious sometimes want to control things or to make the world the way that they would like it. And I think I guess it's a lesson for all of us in some ways. Maybe a rebel isn't a really distinct category. It's someone who's constantly doing the work of not becoming a reactionary in some ways. I don't know.
Yeah, when he's talking about the categories, he's talking about the rebels that, I don't know if it was the reactionary type, but that run the risk of becoming a new ringleader, right? A ringleader of a new thing, just like it's like a cult of personality in their own or whatever. And so it seems like purity of motivation is important in a few different places. When we question the purity of motivation in terms of strivers, right? So that's the people who are the boots on the ground, the people who are pushing, the really ideological types, like I'm thinking of the professors at Antioch, or the students who are demanding more racial equity or whatever it might be. And that sort of in my mind brings up that thing that we hear so much about, where we talk about the Holocaust and how people acted in Germany, and we want to say we would have been the ones to stand up to that, but would you really have been? Would you really have been the one to stand up to that? We see it as wrong now, but if you lived in that time and place, in that culture, would you have been? Who would you have been?
Yeah. And
maybe you fall according to type. Maybe you would just fall according to type in any time period, or maybe there's something that spurs people to do different. Are we types, or are we pressured by our environment? What makes a person fall into one of these categories?
I do think it's filtered through personality and through I think values too. Like if you're willing to sort of sell your soul, if you even believe you have a soul, to get your kid into an Ivy League college, even if your kid's going to imbibe values that are potentially harmful, I think you just do what's most convenient and what suits you. And I've seen a lot of people like that, sort of like in the corporate world, where they just kind of shrug this off and they're like, well, yeah, I don't really agree with this, but I don't care. You know, I'll put my pronouns in my emails because I am trying to advance in the company. I'm up for a promotion, so I'm going to play along with this.
Yeah.
And I do think that's a certain personality type.
So where's the line between a normie and a striver then?
Oh, I think the normies are people who wouldn't necessarily actively violate their own conscience. They're just kind of trying to live their daily life and support themselves, support their kids, deal with life's daily problems. And maybe they feel stressed enough by that they feel like, I can't absorb one more thing. So they're sort of low information because they're not really investigating, the attempt at the cultural revolution that's going on. So they're just like, oh God, like I don't do politics. I don't want to hear all that. And, I don't blame them, because people are trying to take care of themselves and their families. And I don't think it's really that easy to have a family and raise a family successful and do what you need to do. And maybe your kid has an illness or a disability and you're dealing with that. I don't think it's easy. So I think normies, though, are where we should place a lot of our attention, because normies and doubters, because those are people that, if given more information, could speak up in some way and could oppose this.
Yeah, I think of the normies as a lot of the friends that not a lot of, a few particularly close friends who I have spoken to about some of these things, that just sort of say to me, David, why are you that bothered? Like, why does this affect you? Is this particularly big in psychology? I'm like, can you not see what's going on? And after a conversation with them, I sort of think to myself, there is a part of me that kind of goes, yeah, gee, well, I mean, if I was a normie, I guess my life would be a bit easier. I guess I would have just not seen these things. Maybe my life could be functioning just fine, where I'm paying attention to my house, my partner, that sort of stuff. And I think James Lindsay talks about this as being a category of people, the normies, who can be easily mystified into thinking a certain way. So maybe that is, as you say, Jen, like a place where we should focus a lot of attention trying to persuade.
I think, back to that, is it a personality thing? Because I do suspect most of us are either, somewhat or slightly or more contrarian or canary in the coal mine. Like, I think there may be just a sensitivity factor to something being off. And so I tend to be like, if there's just something weird in any circumstance, if there's just something like, I'll just be like, I'm like Princess and the Pea, right? Like something's funny, and I don't even, it does better or worse. It's just sort of, some people have their dials are for a different, piece of the spectrum of what you can be aware of. Right. And like, some of us are just off where something's off. And not only that, there's some curiosity too, like, wait a minute, like, this isn't just random instances of odd things. Like, these seem to all be connected. And now I'm going to go down a rabbit hole, right? To like figure it out. And I think that probably just takes a certain makeup to get worried enough about it, get worried enough about it and investigate.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting to think about the temperamental qualities that could put you in a certain category. And I think the category where that seems to be, I don't know, perhaps most pivotal is the division between the doubter and the rebel, and what plays out in a person's life to make them make the decision to take a risk, like a massive social risk, such as speaking openly about a disagreement that you have that other people with the way that other people are doing things. And he had James Lindsay had some advice for each category. I took a couple notes. For the strivers, so he says we have to convince them of the fact that they are not needed on the other side of the revolution, and that they are just, there's sort of useful tools that if they continue down the road that they're on, they work themselves out of usefulness, because that quality of activism is only necessary until the ends have been achieved, and then it becomes a liability. And for the normies, to wake them up, which he referred to as red pilling.
Yeah.
It's a cute statement. For the doubters, convince them that they need to either become a supporter, so put their backing behind the people who are speaking up, the rebels, or become a rebel themselves and stop sitting in purgatory. Put your money where your mouth is, or pony up and open your mouth. And then for the rebels, to stay engaged and don't allow themselves to get demoralized and fatigued.
And find support, because you'll need it, because it's hard to be putting yourself out there and opposing something that most people are going along with, because you're absorbing a lot of social risk and financial risk, and it can take an emotional toll. So having the support and having people around you that have have good intentions and good intentions for you, I think keeps you invigorated. I feel that way in the groups. It's lovely to be with people who are independent thinkers and just really question things and really have, I think, ethical standards for themselves and for the world. That to me it's like a bit of a infusion of good energy.
Definitely. I was thinking James Lindsay was going quite hard on the doubters, wasn't he, in the podcast episode? He was saying, for all the people that come up to me after I've done a talk or in private or message me and say, I really agree with you, but I just can't say anything about it. He's like, well, what good is that for me? What good is that? You're not changing anything. You're not making the world a less risky place, a safer place for people like me. So yeah, do something about it. It was quite a rallying kind of, I think he was trying to rally people together and get the doubters to think about that, as well as give some solace to the rebels, like you said there, Jen. That we should carry on and not be fatigued. Maybe there's a sense in which James Lindsay does feel like there's a fatigue happening. I'd be interested to know if that is coming from somewhere, because it feels like there's been a couple of years now in which it's been full force. So maybe he's even thinking of his own fatigue sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah, he's talked about that he gets, he basically made himself the foremost expert on CRT in the United States by there's a period of time where he was reading like 16 hours a day and doing a deep dive into stuff that, I can't stand reading. I don't know how he does it. It's just like,
and the stuff he was reading is like really dry, miserable.
Reading Foucault and all that stuff that to me just makes my brain feel like it's starting to slide towards psychosis. And he did that to understand CRT, but the roots of that type of thinking as well. And that's really, I think, exhausting. But I also have to say, and I do want doubters of course I want doubters to speak up. And I also feel like people do have to make a realistic assessment of what risks and losses they can absorb. If I was a single mother and I had no financial support, my first focus in life would be supporting my kid and keeping a roof over their head. And I probably wouldn't want to risk my job unless I knew I was extremely well connected and had a few potential safe landing places. So I also don't feel condemnation towards people who find themselves in a situation where they can't risk things. But I do also think sometimes people are in a situation where they could risk things, but they might have to set things up first and make some plans before they can take risks.
Yeah. That might be a big difference between a rebel and a doubter. Is there's a gulf that needs to be taken into consideration of, am I in a place where I can do this? And some people are fortunate enough to be in a place, independent, owning their own business, being a speaker, being someone who's, become quite famous potentially out of this movement, who's been given a platform for that reason. And then you've got people, who are looking after themselves and need to make sure they time it right, and say the right thing, and come to a group in which they can practice doing that on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
I think it's easy to be frustrated with a group as a whole, but when you look at the individual level, you have to remember that people are trying to make the best choice that they can for themselves. And so you have to be compassionate to that, but it is easy to get frustrated on the whole. And I really, when he said that part about the frustration that he has with the people who come up and voice their agreement, but also admit that they don't feel like they can speak up themselves, it reminded me so much of the experience of being in graduate school and being in a course where I'm the only one saying anything to a professor who's trying to ram this stuff down our throats, and getting emails after class thanking me, people coming up to me in the hallway and thanking me for saying this. And there was this one day, and I was just talking with Christine Siefin and Yako on the CTA podcast the other day. So I just told this story, but I'll just say it really quick. But there was this day when the teacher asked the class for feedback. We were talking, I gave my feedback. She tried to correct me, so I corrected her on what I was actually saying, and she started to cry about her emotional labor. And this moment was so awkward. And then a person shushed me and told me that they'd heard enough of my white voice.
I'm sorry, that's such bullshit.
You've got a very white voice, Leslie.
Yeah, it was enough white voices for one day. And so this actually happened, and I'm sitting there, and this dynamic is occurring where, I was speaking really calmly and respectfully to the teacher. I wasn't trying to put her in a corner, but she used this opportunity to pretty much emotionally blackmail me into feeling bad. And then the person to my left said, we've heard enough white voices. And I looked around the room and I saw so many people that I knew agreed with me, and none of them said anything. And they just let me sit there in that tension of being cried at over here and told to shut up over here. And I'm sitting there with it, and I'm like, you jerks, just say something. And nobody said anything. And I was the frustration I felt with those people. It wasn't about saving me. It was about, you guys agree with me,
How did you know that they agreed with you? Did you get something? Could you see it in their faces that they agreed with you? It
was the emails and the comments outside of class had been. This was near the end of the semester, where it was, I knew where people fell. There were at least 5 people in that room that I knew felt like I did, but had never said anything. And, just to let somebody else crash and burn.
Yeah.
Really dick move.
And I have a hard time understanding that, because even if you're, if you have to be in self-protective mode for some reason, okay, I can kind of understand that. But this is relatively low stakes. It's the classroom. What's the worst thing that's going to happen if you voice your opinion? And the more people who do it, the more the safety expands. So they're not going to throw everybody out of the program. Maybe the professor's now going to have a grudge against you. And so she'll give you a B instead of an A. Whoop-de-frickin' do. I don't know. I have a hard time understanding how people can resist the impulse to say something, because when I know something's bullshit, when it smells of bullshit to me, I can't just sit there. Like, it drives me crazy. And there's also a piece of me that takes pleasure in saying it, because especially like if I know that the person who's talking the shit and has like more control, if they think that nobody's dare going to say it, it's just, I don't know how people resist. It's really fun to just be like, it's just fun to be the one who kind of throws sand in the gears. What are they going to do to you? Fucking take you out and shoot you?
Well, yeah, it's true. It's like, what are you risking at that point?
Yeah.
And that is a question that, like, what is the risk? Really, it's just the feeling of being outside the herd, outside the bubble. And that's painful enough for some people that it's not about losing your job and it's not about whatever. It's just the experience of social alienation is so scary.
That's really big for people, isn't it? Because like people have come up to me and said, like, I said, why didn't you speak out when you felt that way to people who maybe disagreed with certain things that were said at this Whiteness Day presentation? And they said, well, I'm glad I didn't. And I said, why? And they said, well, I saw what happened to you. And I was like, well, I'm still here. I'm like still on the course. Like, you know, didn't have a chunk of meat taken out of me. Like, but it was such a powerful thing for them to have seen someone, you know, ostracized for a few weeks, or like, you know, lose a few loose connections, should we say, with people who weren't really their friends, and, you know, get a few cold looks from people. But I'm not saying it was fun. I didn't enjoy it, but even just watching what happened to me as a witness rather than actually being me was enough for them. I was like, you should have tried being me for a bit, but you couldn't even hack watching me do it. So yeah.
You know, all this makes me, this last few bunch of minutes, I've just been like, my brain is fixated on self-care. Like, what is the self-care for the rebel, or what is because there are these tools. Like, I was just even hearing again today the story of, like, you know, Jay Bhattacharya, the doctor, right, who came out with the Great Barrington Declaration, or one of the people, and he lost 35 pounds because it was so distressing, all the flack he got, right? And
wow.
So you know, not that everybody loses 35 pounds. And I watch him, and I watch other people who are very active on Twitter. You watch, I mean, he may have his own reasons, Jordan Peterson, but you can see the toll. Sometimes people start getting very raw. And then sometimes the way that they're interacting on Facebook, they start to become, how would I say it? Like, there's something that's almost counteractive, or they can start having, I'm not saying any of them, but like, you start having your own tyrannical way you're behaving because of the woundedness of being attacked. And so it's making me wonder, like, and I mean, we alluded to this before, like, what would be tools for people to either talk to themselves or mitigate those feelings, or if they're having those feelings, how to work with them so that they don't have that devastating, you know, it's not as devastating to speak out. And I think I mentioned that to you, Leslie. I don't know if it was someone that talked to Benjamin Boyce. I forget. I don't know if they said they put like a bubble around themselves and they just imagine, I'm just making it up now, right? But if there's some way people could psychologically prep themselves, or have, and I don't have the answers to it, but I'd like to see more of that. Because I do, you know, I mean, you probably know in your own case, Leslie, like whatever toll and Jen and David, it did take on you. You still were going to do it. And it was still hard, and is still hard, but somehow your inner resources are such that you kind of can. But I'd like to see the rebels not become misshapen in some sense by having done it, and then they're out in the world being reactive in their own ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if the preventives there are, if any, but I'm just really, my brain is preoccupied with this for the last few minutes.
I think that the most important thing is community. That's what it comes down to for me, because it's the pain of social alienation is so real, and we can act like it's not, and we can act like we're above that or whatever, but we're not, because we're social creatures. And if we weren't, then we wouldn't be so bothered by the social forces that we're annoyed by in the first place. And so that pain of social alienation, the way to counter that is to find a new group of people to make your reference, make that new community your reference point. And that it helped me tremendously to find CTA. So that was my first step, was finding a group of people that, agreed. And I'm kind of keeping an eye on the chat a little bit. Thank you, Benjamin. I was, but I'm not anymore. And let's see. The price for speaking up now is relatively small, says Oceana 23. And Jay says, Deborah, this could be a whole stream in itself, such an important topic. So yeah, I agree that it is so important to figure out what emboldens people. One of the things that I've noticed, and we've talked about this before, is like all the comments on this YouTube channel that are looking at the Antioch videos and stuff. People will say, you're so brave, and that's the thing that people come back to. And I don't feel like it takes tremendous bravery. It just takes some to stand up, and it takes whatever combination of character traits, like Jennifer being allergic to bullshit and enjoying calling it out when you see it, or whatever it is. So you've got your character traits, you've got your community, but there's some aspect of bravery involved in that. But what I see is that people are aspiring to that. People are praising that thing. And so it seems like there's an impulse in people to try to raise that up. And if we can demonstrate that you're not punished for bravery, that you actually come out of it better on the other end. You come out of it cleaner of conscience, more aligned with yourself, more aligned with people that actually embody the values that you have and want to see in the world. I think that it's something that could be contagious. I think there is a contagion to that. And that's how I believe that we can get people to stop fence sitting.
Yeah, I agree with you about the importance of community. And I just feel like the people I've met since I spoke out have really restored my faith in humanity. I feel, even though there's bad things happening in a larger context, I feel more hopeful about humanity than I have, because I've just met people that are so, I just think really admirable characters. And I like what you said, Deborah, about the rebels not becoming misshapen, because I do think this stuff can, twist you like a bonsai tree or something, because it's so powerful. And it's so, if you're trying to really be educated about it and understand it as a phenomenon, you have to do quite a bit of reading. So you're absorbing the energy of it. And it's kind of like taking in a lot of poison. And I'm still working on how do I, not become a kind of negative, paranoid person, and you're always taking in things that are bad, and you're looking at things and saying, oh my gosh, this is a potential threat. If this continues, this could go this way, that way, this is bad. And then to be like, oh, okay, and now I can set this aside and enjoy myself and enjoy my family. I feel like I have to make a very conscious effort to do that. And I have to sort of say, okay, I'm setting this down now. And now I'm in the moment. And, but I think it's challenging.
That's where it has the possibility of being not exactly the mirror, but insofar as, say, people who, use a critical theory lens, you're constantly looking for the things that are wrong. You should be doing the revolution every day. If you're not doing it every day, every second, then you're a racist, whatever, right? So it's like, you have to watch to not let that same sort of absolutist thinking take us over too.
Exactly, because then you're just an absolutist pain in the ass of a different flavor, which, I mean, who wants that around them, and who wants to be that? I don't want that. And, so I have a real love for Jordan Peterson. I think he's a really, really clear thinker, and I admire him and enjoy him. And I also notice that there's an emotional toll that all of his work has taken on him. I think you can see it in his face. And, he had a very prolonged illness, and his emotions seem very close to the surface and very raw to me. And now, granted, I'm just seeing him when he's talking about these issues. So he may set it aside and just really be chilled out when he's not actively engaging with this. I don't know. But I see that, I see someone who's kind of, essentially taken on the weight of the world.
And what do you think makes the toll particularly hard on him? Because I have some thoughts about that, but what do you think?
Well, one thing I think is that he has a proclivity towards depression. He's talked about that a lot, and he's absorbing and engaging with a lot of very depressing issues on a regular basis. And the other thing is, I think he thinks about things very deeply. He doesn't just stay on the shallow end of the pool to protect himself from the murky depths. And there's a risk that comes along with that. And he's engaging in this a high percentage of his time. That's what I see. What do you see?
Well, those things are really good points. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. And he's been a huge inspiration to me, and I've learned a lot from him. But I would say that he also tends to sort of isolate himself in a way that makes him a singular target. And there's a bit of I wouldn't put him in that necessarily like that ringleader reactionary category, but he does have a bit of cult of personality around himself. And so I think that leaves a person a little bit more vulnerable. So I don't sense a strong community around him. He has himself at the top of a pyramid with a lot of people that are supporting and cheering him on. But I think that community aspect that's so insulating seems to be absent. And he does have his family, which is good, but he just seems.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, Deborah, go ahead.
Because I was also saying just the notoriety itself is probably just daunting, but he did an episode on it, and I found this admirable. He had Jonathan Peugeot, and then Greg, I forget who it was, someone who's more like politically liberal, like a Democrat. Both came in and gave him feedback, because remember the whole incident when he commented on the Sports Illustrated model cover. She was a little bit heavier than one might, and he made some comment about whether that's beauty and he got a lot of flack. So he asked them to come live and tape it, right, and give him feedback about that. So at least there was that one incident of some people giving him some input. I don't know if they're doing this on a regular basis. I could see if he didn't have it at all, right, and he just kind of holding up with Tammy somewhere, right, or something like that wouldn't be.
I saw that one too. I thought that was interesting that he chose to do that. And I don't know to what that could be attributed, that tendency to be more insular and, maybe it's something in his personality, maybe, who knows, but I think that was very late in the game too.
Yeah.
I mean, that was like after there was just this year maybe, or late last year. So he'd been through a lot by that point, starting to seek feedback. And we've all seen him go through some raw stuff.
He should be on Twitter. I'm up in the middle of the night and I'm like, he's tweeting in the middle of the night. You know what I mean? And I'm like, please just put down your phone and get some rest, He
does seem to sort of work himself to the bone, doesn't he? He kind of, when he goes on a tour, he really goes on a tour, doesn't he? He goes on a tour of like hundreds of cities all around Europe. And it's just like, and he'll sort of boast about it. And you'll think, oh, yeah, really that amount of shows? He's doing like 5-6 shows a week sort of thing, probably even more than that. Big shows where he goes up and he doesn't prepare. He spends 2 hours kind of riffing on a topic and going, yeah. I don't know. He seems to have a thirst for work and sort of mental exploration, which is quite something, isn't it? But I think it probably does isolate him. It does. He's not he doesn't share that with a lot of people, and maybe his work does mean that his intellectual curiosity is one that he has privately rather than something he shares and does so in a shared environment. Yeah.
I'm also thinking, like, so then if we look at different styles, right? So James Lindsay, like, he does a lot of stuff just using humor or going your mother, or right? Like whether we could ever emulate that or we'd want to emulate that. A lot of it is he just does clown and I know you are, but what am I, like, stupid, whatever. And that seems to make some, like, he doesn't, he may get under pressure sometimes, you can kind of sense it, but it seems like he creates a little more room around himself by just being like, iron law of woke projection, you idiot. Like,
yeah. It makes you just think about community as like an anchor point. You need an anchor point if you're a rebel, don't you? To not feel like you are not only ostracizing yourself from the actual reality, but the reality of what's going on in your own head. You have to have a community around you of people to go, oh, no, just like we all have, like, a community of people that can maybe just let you know gently, no, that's not quite right. Or maybe you might have got that wrong, or might have seen it a certain way. We can all get, potentially those of us that have kind of gone through a certain something or had our, jobs threatened. I think of people like Kathleen Stock, when you were talking about Jordan Peterson and thinking about the things that have contributed to him being the way he was, I was thinking of Kathleen Stock as well as being someone who felt that she was just booted out of her university and driven out with hate. And I wonder how much she'll always have to carry that around with her in a way, like the threat of being undermined as an individual, having a livelihood taken away from her on such a deep level. I wonder if that's something she's always going to have to carry with her on some level. A kind of slight paranoia that something like that might happen again. I don't know. So yeah, community is so important.
Yeah. And I saw, who is it here? Gin Bottle says he likes the sound of his own ego too, I would add. And I think that's an area where I hesitate to really criticize, because but I see the point. The point is well made, but again, it's when somebody's life is on display this way, it feels easy to make those kind of observations. And yet, can you not get caught up in that sense of driving purpose to a point where you can see yourself in a grandiose way? I mean, I think that would be natural if you are in that position and doing those things. And so to watch that happen, it seems like it is what's going on to some extent with him. And that's something that community can help to buffer, because having people close and around you can help keep you interconnected instead of standing above.
Also seems like it's a download. Like, if there's that much energy running through someone by people's projections on them, people being aware of them, and it's a lot. I usually think if you don't have those other relationships or interconnections to spread that out into, I always feel like that goes into the weakest links in your psyche. Like, say if people do a lot of yoga and they have Kundalini energy, and then they're like having a psychotic episode. And so I would think, like, the more you can ground through your relationships, with the feedback from them, be normal, they treat you like you're like a normal person, a lot of that, would be less likely to disturb somebody in a certain sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. What do you think, Jennifer?
Yeah, I do. Jordan Peterson even made a comment about that. He said your sanity is better outsourced, which I thought was really interesting. But I think there's truth to that. Like, sometimes you don't know if you're getting if you're starting to go adrift until someone who knows you well says to you, like, knock it off. And it kind of gets you back grounded. I think even though this stuff that's going on is really serious, I also think at the same time, it's good to not, it's like you have to take it seriously, and at the same time, you have to not take it too seriously. And it's sort of a holding pairs of opposites. It's like a paradox. And because otherwise you just start to drown in it. And I think having a sense of humor about it is really funny. Because if you were watching this as an uninvolved party, say from another planet, you would find it quite amusing, really. you know, like just that thing that you said earlier, Leslie, about like, we've heard enough white voices. I mean, it's just like, it's preposterous.
Yeah.
It's like, it's really funny. And I don't know, I think laughing at how foolish it is and how foolish we can all be. It's just, I don't know, kind of breaks down for me, that like breaks down my attachment to this. Cause I mean, I can really get obsessive and sort of get brain lock. And when I just remember like, this is stupid. And people have always done foolish things. And this is part of the human condition, and at least laugh at it. Yeah. Push back against it, but also have a laugh.
Yeah, I'd recommend like people listening to the Monty Python's Life of Brian. There's some really good, like, it's not only good because it's funny, but it's also great because there's some examples of what those guys were talking about like back then, which echoes so well, like several decades into what we're experiencing now. And it's like, it's quite a nice thing to realize that actually there has been a certain, maybe not in this form, but there's always people that say, try and stone you for even just saying a word, even though you're trying to explore what the word means. You know, you think about, what were they discussing? They were discussing the word Jehovah or something like that. And then there was someone who was just trying desperately to stone one of them. I can't remember the exact scene now, but like even
cancel culture.
Yeah, it's exactly like cancel culture. You know, it reminds you of like a professor who tries to talk about, I think, the kind of like the cultural relevance of and the significance and power of using the N-word, and then even using the N-word was enough to get him fired. And it reminds you of when in Life of Brian they're turning up for a ritual stoning. It's funnier than it sounds, actually, now I'm saying out loud, but like even just mentioning certain words would mean the crowd turned on themselves and started throwing stones at each other. And there's a scene, I think, they're bringing Life of Brian to the stage in England, and it was recently announced that I think I saw it on GB News that the actors do not want to use or say certain words from the script, and I think it was the words that pertain to this scene that was I think it was one of the kind of group of defectors from the kind of was it the Roman Empire, and they were sat in a sort of like a Colosseum with their friends, and one of the individuals, the chap, kind of says, "I've decided I want to be a woman."
Yeah, it was Stan. He says, "I want to be called Loretta."
I want to be called Loretta. That's it. And
but you haven't got a womb.
And he
but
said,
I want to have babies.
Did he say something about wanting to be liberated? And then John Cleese's character goes, "I think he wants to be liberated from reality."
Yeah.
He's just going to go, that's a relevant point.
Play or
Sorry,
something?
Deborah, you cut out there. Your audio cut out. Try it again.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
No. Is it that scene might not make it into the stage play?
Yeah,
did I hear that?
the actors have said that they don't wish to say it because they think it's too offensive, and so yeah.
Yeah, that movie is so fantastic. It like has all of the different components, all the archetypes are present. Yeah. The mob mentality of the people who are just caught up in the frenzy is there, and the reactionary canceling is there, and the tribalism, the tribalism between the different reactionary groups, the
People's Front of Judea, the Judean People's Front, and they're all warring with each other.
And the Popular Front, who's just one guy.
Probably strivers, right? Like you probably map what we were talking about, right?
They would be strivers, exactly.
Uh-huh.
But there were strivers among the rebels.
Yeah.
Now it's a breakdown of everything.
Well, there was one more that I was thinking about, which was that they were sat around saying, yeah, okay, but apart from like the sewage system, the roads, housing, what blah blah blah, what have the Romans ever done for us? And it's that sort of like decolonializing the kind of like mentality of like, we can't look back on history with anything but complete disdain for all of the heresy and all this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So now everybody has to go watch The Life of Brian this weekend. This
really
week before next week.
Yeah. Before it gets cancelled.
Yeah, no, I think that that point is really well made, that humor is important. And it really is. We can't take anything too seriously, least of all ourselves. But
Yeah.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we wrap up so Jennifer can go to her group?
I have no final thoughts. My head is empty.
I think possibly thinking about how to, aside from just letting the strivers know the game might be over, potentially at least directing them to the game you want them to be playing next for your own purposes. I don't know what that would be. I don't know if you say like, I think this thing is the bottom's going to fall out of it soon, but maybe you want to go over, I don't know where the go over here would be, but like possibly giving them something else to do.
So you need like a striver herdsman.
Yeah, maybe.
Mm.
They'd probably have to be prestigious enough though. Like that's the thing. I don't know who moves them or how they make their calculation exactly. And again, they probably have to think they believe it, but I don't know. I don't know what, some of them are probably blatantly calculating. It may be just having alternate pathways or knowing there are alternate pathways to meet their aims.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was slightly struck by that as I was listening to James Lindsay's podcast, was him talking about it, sort of explaining to strivers or convincing them that the route they're going down is not good for them. And I was thinking, okay, but yeah, how do we do that? That is, if we knew that, everything would fall out, wouldn't it? That you'd eventually kind of just say, look, you guys that are interested in power and merit and interested in heading down, look, the structure isn't working for you. Here's a structure that does. And then let's go back to this structure here. Yeah, I was left thinking like that's the real turning point in some ways.
Well, it does seem like there's a distinction to be made, and I guess this goes back into it a little bit, but there's a distinction to be made within that category of striver between those who are really pragmatic and seeking power and merit and those who are swept up in the mob frenzy. Because either way, they're the ones pushing it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So what would you do with the mob frenzy people? Sow doubt?
Is that remind me of the differential between those then? Mob frenzy people who are strivers but are just so in it, like a load of, imagine like sharks in a chewing on a carcass. Is that people who strivers but they're so blindly ambitious that they're just kind of eating and eating and eating till the whole thing falls apart?
Yeah, I don't know if they're doing it out of, well, it's probably both. I mean, some it is some search for meaning and some of it is a search for vengeance. Like it's kind of like I was saying, you give a higher meaningful thing for the ones that want meaning to go to. I don't know what to do with the people who just want to, so vengeance, like
Right.
go at that. I don't really want to give them something else. I want them to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know.
Well, maybe it's to be continued if we want to talk about it again.
We'll solve it.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for a great chat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys later. Thanks for everybody who was in the chat today, and go watch some Monty Python.